Yipee-Ki-Yay, Mr. Falcon.
See people here, this fine place on this fine night. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just imagining that I'm in a bar and not here. Special topic today. We're talking about 1984's The Thing, directed by John Carpenter, starring Kurt Russell, Wilfred Brimley of Quaker Oats and Diabetes fame, and Keith David. If you don't know who he is, look him up on IMDb because you should know who he is. He's a fantastic character actor. He's been doing great work for years. Boop. And I'm an idiot because The Thing came out in 1982, not 1984. Thank you. Boop. The outdoor scenes for this classic horror sci-fi flick were shot in British Columbia, standing in for Antarctica, which is the setting for one of the most frightening creature feature sci-fi horror crossovers in history, what many people think of as the crowning achievement of John Carpenter's varied and successful career, which did have some highs and lows. This was a low for him when it came out. Believe it or not, this movie was a flop. It didn't do good at the box office because it was up against Blade Runner, and E.T. had just come out. Not great. And critics fucking hated it. They hated the gore. They hated the premise. They didn't seem to like anything about it. So it tanked. It tanked until the VHS generation got a hold of it and started renting it and buying it and watching it on late night cable, and it became what people know as a cult classic. These days, it's one of those horror movies that people have a hard time believing wasn't popular at some point. It's iconic, and people also love to argue about the ending. They've been doing it since 1984, since the movie came out, and they still do it today. It's an ambiguous ending. We'll get into that today. That's primarily what we're going to be talking about. Me and my regular co-host, TJ, who's a huge fan of this movie, way bigger than me, knows a lot more about it. We're going to be getting into it. Disclaimer, we did screw something up when we're talking about the ending. We mention a flamethrower that actually isn't there. MacReady does not have a flamethrower. We know this. We address this. It doesn't really matter. But just so you know, we know he didn't have a fucking flamethrower, okay? If you haven't seen this movie, check it out. It's a remake of a 1951 atomic age horror movie, black and white, called The Thing from Another Planet. Also worth checking out if you're really into it. And there was a sequel prequel from the teens that don't see it. You don't need to watch it. I mean, if you gotta, but be warned. Okay, so let's get into it. The theories behind the meaning of the ending of John Carpenter's The Thing from 1984. Were Childs and MacReady infected? Was Childs infected? Was anyone infected? Did the aliens survive? Did they accomplish their mission? I don't know. Maybe. Let's find out. All right, so today we're here talking about John Carpenter's The Thing. The original version of this film came out in 1951, and it was titled then The Thing from Another World, right?
Yes.
And that took place, it was set in the North Pole instead of Antarctica, and I looked it up because I can go on Wikipedia, and that was based on a novella from 1938 by a guy named John W. Campbell that was called Who Goes There? And and it also included a shape-shifting monster that could imitate any living being, people included, and was also set at the North Pole.
Right.
Actually, the novella was set in Alaska. The novella was set in Alaska, which isn't that much different.
Yeah,
but
it's a remote spot. I guess it's
Yeah.
it's what you need out of it. And they kind of ditched the shape shifting bit for the original movie. It was just like a big dude.
Yeah, I think they made him. They leaned more into the idea that it wasn't a carbon-based life form like
Right.
us. Like it was more like it was closer to a plant, right? Like a living plant, and
Yeah.
that's why it could change shape and parts of it could grow without the body and everything like that. I mean, it was what? I mean, that's early in film, 51. The special effects weren't really a thing. It was just guys in suits, right?
Yeah.
So they did what they could. And I think they had to kind of play into the Cold War hysteria of the time too, because I mean, they do end up making it a military base, and it's almost it's this mix of military and civilian guys in the old movie because they're in the North Pole, which is really close to Russia, right?
Yeah.
It's always been a hot spot since the beginning of the Cold War.
And they leaned into the idea that they were remote. They were alone. Nobody's coming to save them. That winds up being an enemy in itself. Is just like how isolated you are. That movie scared the crap out of me when I was a kid.
That part of it,
Well, just the whole thing. I saw that movie when I was like 8 or 10 years old, because my dad was a fan of it. And he's like, this movie is scary. And I was like, how? It's black and white. How scary could it be? And yeah, it was it was creepy. If you're a little kid, it was pretty scary. I loved it.
yeah, it works. It still works. It's not so corny that it's not even close to being hard to watch in today.
No, not at all.
But Carpenter's The Thing is something else. It almost killed his career as a director, believe it or not.
Right.
But today it's regarded as a sci-fi horror classic.
It's a masterpiece. Yeah, it's enjoyed this renaissance, because people have had what year did that come out? 82. 82, yeah. They've had 40 years to appreciate it and see it for what it is. And man, that movie holds up. It's so good. It's my favorite horror movie. I mean, I qualified as it's not I don't think it's the best, but it's my favorite. I loved everything about it.
Is that how you would classify it, as a horror movie?
Absolutely, yeah. It's I mean, it's sci-fi, but you look at what that movie does to the characters, and everyone is just scared shitless, and like you're isolated. This thing is out to get you, and like almost the most terrifying part for me is just when they're all looking at each other, and for people who haven't seen it, they do keep that part of the source material where the thing can copy, any living being and make itself a perfect copy. So once it's had time to infect someone, it's like becomes like a doppelganger, and you're not sure if the people you're looking at are aliens or infected, or if they're the real person. And so one of the biggest enemies in the movie is just like you don't know who to trust. And just imagine being in the middle of nowhere. You have no hope of hiking out of there. No one's coming, and you have no idea who's on your side and who's out to kill you.
Yeah, and people have to really understand what that isolation means for the location where that movie's set. I mean, if you're in Antarctica, you in a lot of ways you might as well be on the moon, especially if it's winter. You can hit YouTube up and search for McMurdo Station and just life in Antarctica and things like that, and you'll find people who've documented. There's actual documentaries and people who've documented their lives living in. Well, McMurdo Station, I don't know why, my wife and I fell down a rabbit hole and we started watching these
That'll happen.
back to back. Yeah, and it was very enjoyable. And by the end of it, we're like, we're going to go move to fucking Antarctica and be, I don't know, welders or something. But there's a place called McMurdo Station, which is the main American base, and there's a lot of international people there, and that's on the coast, right? So that's already pretty isolated, but that's like the big town of the entire continent is McMurdo Station. And then there's one YouTuber who chronicles his whole winter at South Pole Station, which is really close to the actual South Pole. And that is more like what you see in John Carpenter's movie.
Right.
It's in the winter, the people live there. I mean, the only difference would be that it would be nighttime all the time. I think it is in this movie, isn't it? There's sun.
There's daylight.
Is there?
Yeah, there's
Okay.
daylight. Yeah, they have what appears to be like a regular day-night cycle, which now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know how accurate that is, because they have like sunny seasons and dark seasons.
Yeah, because in the summer in Antarctica, it's never really dark. There's like a dusk, and the sun almost goes down, but it doesn't quite. And then, same thing for most of the winter. The sun almost comes up, but doesn't quite. But there's also a couple months where it's just pitch black fucking darkness.
Yeah.
And snow and ice and horrifying storms with winds that you can't believe.
It sounds like a slice of hell.
Yeah. It's like living on the moon. It's like being in space. It's, and that's the really original thing about this movie. Because, I mean, the premise is great. The premise of an alien that can take over people and mimic them and become them, so that nobody trusts anybody anymore, and nobody knows who's good and who's bad. It's a great setup, and it's kind of the same setup that Invasion of the Body Snatchers used from a horror perspective. In that first one, God, when did that come out? Yeah, it actually, the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers came out in 1956. And then it was made again before The Thing came out. It was made in 1978. That's the one with Donald Sutherland and the meme, the pointing meme that everyone knows and loves. But that had the same thing with pod people, where no one knew who had been converted and no one knew who was still human. And even at the very end, that famous pointing scene of Donald Sutherland is when the last remaining character that's still human realizes her friend is no longer one of her kind. So that's been done a little bit, but putting people in such extreme conditions at a science base, isolated in the middle of Antarctica during a storm, that'll ratchet up the tension.
And the knowledge that this thing wants to, get its tendrils or tentacles or whatever wrapped around you so it can kick the you out of your own body.
Yeah, so before what we're primarily going to be talking about today is the ending of this movie. But before we get to that, could you explain real quick just the mechanics of the thing, the alien in the thing? What does it do and how does it do it?
Right. So like the setup is this. It evidently this thing, from outer space needs to get a hold of you, and it can infect you. It could do one of two things. It could like grab a hold of you and forcibly just kind of take over your body and make itself a copy of you, or it can do more like a slow infection. Like if you look at a lot of the scenes in the movie, there's a lot of, it's very subtle, but they'll focus on just how close knit a community of people, you have living at this station. They all live in close quarters, and they share stuff. They're passing bottles and cigarettes and joints back and forth. It's very communal, so it can infect you that way. And once the copy is made and you're infected and you're no longer you're this alien, it's trying to blend in so that it can survive. And I guess the goal is to just keep infecting as many people as possible. My problem is there's so many people at that outpost. It's got to find a way out either in like a rescue team coming in or just laying dormant in the ice.
So in that respect, it kind of behaves like a virus would in a movie.
Right, yeah. Only it's disguised as your best buddy, and so that being said, no one you get to a point where nobody knows who's real, who's human, and who's not, and then so you skip to the end, and there's just two guys left, and the big question is, we'll get more into it later, but the big question is, are both of them human? Is one of them infected? Are they both infected? And how do you know? Did they put enough of it on screen for you to make the distinction? And I think you can make the case that they did. And I do have an opinion on that, which we'll get to. But that's the setup.
And in service of the setup, maybe you can answer a question for me that I've kind of had for a while.
Sure.
And that came up on a rewatch of this, because you're the house expert on this movie. So when someone is duplicated, essentially the alien consumes a human body and incorporates it into itself and then creates a copy.
Right.
Right? So this copy, is it self-aware? Like, does it think it's the person that's been copied until it like turns into a monster, or until the alien part of it takes over, or does it not?
I don't know. I think it knows. I think it knows that it's an alien. It's not like a person is walking around unawares, because there's bits of the movie where you could see, like at the end, Wilford Brimley's character, he plays a guy named Blair. He's like one of the lead researchers, like a scientist, and he's the one that sort of figures out what this thing is, and is the first to realize that like they can't let it get out, and he
smashes the radios,
and he
disables the chopper,
yeah,
and the
he disables
snowcat, right?
all the means of transportation, and they wind up locking him up. But then at the end, you see him like quite, deliberately walking around. He's looking over, he pops out of nowhere, and he sticks his hand in that one guy's face and starts to take him over. He's clearly not Blair the researcher at that point. He's acting, and once he knows there's nobody looking at him, and he's alone, and he can get away with like an assimilation. Right. He starts going after people,
and that also begs the question of when did Blair get infected too? Because he's locked in that shed.
Yes, he
the
is.
Whole time
he is,
and he wouldn't have smashed up the radio equipment if he had been the alien at that time, right?
Correct. So when they locked him up, he wasn't infected. He was human, and he was trying to prevent this thing from escaping. But it goes back to how it can get you, and they had to feed him.
Oh, you said the slow. Oh, right,
they had to
too.
feed him.
And also, there was a lot of dudes running around outside in the snow
mm-hmm.
Throughout the movie, and one of them could have been like pounding on the door, "Let me in," and alien.
Yeah, something that happened.
Okay.
Off screen, but it's
okay. But so when someone's assimilated, though, they have to pull in at least some of their memories enough to mimic the human they're supposed to be pretending to be.
Yeah, because they speak like them, and like the copies, and you know that there are people that are hiding in plain sight, because you see them revealed, and you look at it this way too. Like anytime the thing pops out, when there's a bunch of them, it knows that it's toast. They're armed.
That's why it like melts and turns into a monster every time it gets found out.
They're armed to the teeth. And so if there's more, even like 2 or 3 guys against it, it knows that it has no shot, because these guys have the means to destroy it. So because
it can't really argue with the blood test.
No,
when they figure that out. Like it can't sow dissent and be like, "Nuh-uh, it's him," and because that was pretty definitive.
Yeah,
all it's left to do is melt and turn into a monster.
Yeah, it's just a last ditch effort to stay alive, and just it's basically the desperation flailing of something that's been cornered. So that's why.
What's that character's name? The one with the denim jacket that turns into the monster when they're all tied to the couch.
Palmer.
Doing the blood test. Palmer. He's the one with the baseball bat fucking joints.
Yeah.
He's Child's roommate. That's incredible.
He's Knowles' roommate. But it's funny you mention that, because Knowles passes the blood test, And after the thing has gotten into the base, they have a scene where he lights up a big, cone spliff, and he offers it up to Knowles, who takes it. So they shared a joint. So like right there on screen is a clue that at that point Palmer couldn't have been infected yet, because then so too would Knowles have been infected. But he passes the blood test later in the movie.
Okay.
So it creates this cool thing where you're trying to figure out when everybody gets infected. And the information is there on the screen for you to kind of try to piece it together.
I'm glad you brought that up. Let's remember that, the thing about the joint, because that might be important for something I have to say later. But okay, so let's set up the ending. How everything, where the two surviving characters find themselves. So the entire base has been blown up.
Yes, and it's important too how it's been blown up.
Okay, so go ahead.
All right, yeah. So MacReady, Kurt Russell. Oh man, what number one, just a great character and a great performance from Kurt Russell. He just owns every scene he's in. He's such a badass. But they figure out that they're not gonna leave there alive. They have to roast this thing, because even if they all die, they know it can lay dormant in the ice. So they're trying to destroy the whole thing. And you see him walking around, blowing stuff up, pouring fuel all over everything. And a bunch of them are kicking indoors. One of them throws some glass container full of some sort of propellant. And then MacReady comes in right behind him with a Molotov cocktail, just from empty liquor bottles, and just, sends the whole room up in flames. And they do this through the whole barracks. They just, one after another, kick in a door, douse it, and then light it up with a Molotov. Mm-hmm. So then they go down, they blow up the generator, and the last two human guys that are with him get taken over, and he sets off a bunch of dynamite. So this big explosion, he staggers into the snow, he plops down, and presumably he's the only one left. And then out comes Childs.
MacReady we're talking about.
Yeah, it's
right?
MacReady. He's like the last man standing. And then Childs just comes around the corner. He was off somewhere else. And the last we saw him, he was human because he passed the test. And now you have two men sitting across from each other, and they haven't had eyes on each other for a long time. So, who's to say who's who? And then you have the big question, is Childs infected or is he human? And
okay, and the reason people question this so much partly is because Childs, who's played by Keith David, who's an awesome actor, he was in Platoon not long after this film, which was kind of his breakout role, and he's been a character actor ever since. Kids today will know him as the voice of the president on Rick and Morty.
Oh, he is. Yeah. I did not know that.
Yeah. Dude pops up everywhere. But so the survivors, rewinding a little bit, their survivors decide to launch kind of an assault, right? Once they all decide, hey, we're not going to live through this, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure this thing doesn't either. They launch an assault on the research station, and also they find these ice tunnels underneath of it where the alien, as Blair, has been building kind of it looks like a spaceship. It's
out
at
of
least
spare
some kind of
parts.
Yeah, right. Well, it's at least some kind of vehicle that could get it off of Antarctica, presumably, if not into space, right?
Right.
So that's what it was supposed to be, and they blow that fucker up too.
Oh, yeah.
And do you know there's actually ice tunnels like that underneath the South Pole Station?
Really?
Like in that YouTube series I mentioned, he actually takes you through them, and guys just dug them who lived down there over the years for storage and for, to get ice samples originally, but it never thaws or anything, so it just stays there. And people who've lived there carve out these little cubby holes in the wall and leave like little shrines, like stuff from their trip and like photos and shit, and it just stays there. It's fucking eerie. But anyway, before they launch that assault, Childs kind of disappears.
Yeah,
Like,
he's left. He's left
we
guarding
lose
a
track
door.
of him. Yeah, we lose track of him, and then everything blows up, and then he comes upon MacReady, all cold and shit. And he's somehow managed to find yet another bottle of scotch, and he asks Giles where he's been, and his only excuse for his absence is he says he thought he saw Blair. Right, like that's about all he has to offer as an excuse, and there's like some suspicious back and forth between them, right?
Yeah.
And they kind of resolve to freeze to death is kind of how it ends, because for the moment things are, well, comparatively warm because the entire base is on fire.
Yeah.
But it's
Temporarily.
going to get to like 40 below really soon, and they're going to be very, very dead. And that's how the movie ends. That's it. Like, that's how it ends.
Yeah.
So, all right. So what's the big
Well, let me ask
what's
you,
the
Dave,
big solution?
who
All right, go ahead.
is Childs infected?
I think signs point to no.
Okay.
Okay, and I mean, do you want me to tell you why?
Sure.
All right. Well, MacReady just went through some major shit, right, to make sure this thing didn't make it back to civilization, including killing himself, essentially. And, I mean, if he had any doubts, I think he would do something about it. Like, he wouldn't just lay there and freeze to death with the dude and, like, take the chance that this might be the alien. But also, he hands Giles the bottle of scotch that he was carrying around.
Uh-huh.
And he's giving him, like, shady looks, and he's a little weirder to him. And then Giles takes a sip of it. And then you see MacReady, like, smile to himself a little bit, and he kind of settles in. It's kind of subtle, but it's there. And I had this theory that MacReady might have figured out, though he couldn't prove it, that the alien never drinks or smokes cigarettes or smokes weed, or maybe, I don't know, I probably never see it eat other than people. We never see it eat actual food. And I kind of thought that, you know, the fact that he took a pull from the bottle was a signal to MacReady that he was okay. I don't know. There's not much there, and it was obviously intentionally supposed to be ambiguous, right? That's all I got. I have nothing grander than that.
It's funny that you point to that as your proof that he's
All right.
not infected, because I think the fact that he takes a pull from the bottle is the thing that gives him away as being infected.
Okay, all right. Explain.
Okay, so MacReady knows that they can't just like lay down and die, because if one hit, like, I think it's safe to say that MacReady is human for starters, because he comes up with the test, he passes, and then the camera follows him the whole time. Like, he's the
As
focus.
long as we assume that someone who has been transformed knows that they're transformed, that they're an
Right.
alien.
The kid, like, he's your narrator almost. Like, everything follows his perspective. So I don't think there's an opportunity for anyone to get to him. At least nothing on screen. So then you have Childs is unaccounted for. He comes in, he sits down, and
Super sus. It's super sus that
It
he
is.
just vanishes like that, right?
and so the place blows up. MacReady comes shambling out of nowhere, holding a bottle of that scotch, right? And my first thought is, like, where the hell did he get it, right? But one scene or two scenes earlier, he's got a whole, like, sling of bottles on him that he's using for Molotov cocktails.
Oh, for the right,
and
right,
pitching
right.
into the rooms. And, like, they're not filled with scotch. They're filled with fuel.
Yeah, because that wasn't the sticks of dynamite that he was wearing
No.
before. Oh, so it wasn't.
It wasn't
It wasn't a
scotch.
bottle of booze.
I
so
think
does,
it-
wait. All right.
I think
so,
he yanked the rag out of a Molotov cocktail that he had on him, that he very clearly had on him, and his test for whether or not Childs was human was to offer him the bottle. And if you notice, MacReady doesn't drink it.
I was just going to ask because I wasn't trying to pay attention to that. But MacReady never drinks it at the end.
He never takes a pull. And if you
sure?
watch I'm sure. I'm positive.
All right.
If you watch the rest of the movie, he's always drinking. Like when he's playing chess, he's knocking back the scotch.
He drinks through the whole fucking thing.
Yeah, and then even when they have Blair in the shed, Blair drinks, I think, Smirnoff vodka.
He drinks vodka.
Yeah,
he drinks vodka.
He
right,
leaves
clear
him a
stuff.
bottle
Because
of
MacReady
vodka.
takes a hit. MacReady takes a hit off that pint when he comes in and brings it and talks to him.
He does. He takes a hit
Yeah.
from the pint, and right after that, he talks to a character named Fuchs, who says, like, "Hey, MacReady, I had a thought. We should all prepare our own food, preferably eaten out of cans, no sharing of any kind." So again, MacReady, he's careful. He figures out how to.
Then Fuchs
flush
promptly
the thing.
gets killed.
Yeah.
Fuchs promptly gets killed like right after that,
So
right?
why would he offer him a bottle to share in that situation if there's any doubt? So I don't think he would have shared it, period. But he does offer it. He never takes a pull, and it's very clear that he's covered in empty bottles that they filled up with fuel to make the Molotovs. And so I think
and that's really easy to
that's the
lose
giveaway.
track of. That's really easy to lose track of because you could see a lot of people simply assuming that the Molotov cocktails were made of booze,
Right.
with rags in it.
But
right?
if you watch earlier in the movie, he's like picking up empty bottles, looking for
there is a scene,
looking for one that still has some left. I don't think he has so much scotch on hand that he just got all these are like full bottles of scotch that he's throwing into the rooms.
he has like a few like at least like maybe I think 3 cases or so that you see in his shed, but he never really gets to go back to his shed.
No,
because the storm's so bad. They go to check on it and like they barely make it back.
right.
Okay. All right. So this is tracking now. So what we're saying is that. All right. So here's the question though. Along those lines, why is he carrying around a bottle of? Was he going to kill himself with that bottle?
I don't know.
Is that what he was going to do? Is that why he was carrying around before Childs pops up?
Yeah, he may have thought of like dousing himself and lighting himself on fire.
to make sure, even in case he was infected, just in case.
Yeah.
And instead of freezing to death.
Because someone else does that earlier. Like, I think
You don't see it.
It's
it's
off
off screen. It's actually Fuchs, the guy we were
Yes.
just talking about. He apparently, as he's being transformed or consumed, he set himself on fire with a road flare or a signal flare. The flares that they're carrying around the whole movie.
Right.
And and all you see is his burned up corpse and
the
the stump of the
glasses.
flare, and they talk about it. Yeah, they talk about it, but you never actually see it, which is cool. That's something to just bring up about this movie before we get into the ending more, is that it got a lot of shit when it came out for being too gory, right?
Oh, it
And
was gory. Yeah.
it's super gory, and the animatronic creature effects are wild. I mean, it's a gross movie, but it's also subtle when it needs to be. And Carpenter really chose like the things he chose to show as opposed to the things he decided to leave mysterious. And it's really interesting that a movie that's this upfront with the gore and the monster has such an ambiguous ending.
Mm-hmm. And if you talk to John Carpenter about it, he says, "Oh yeah, I know who's infected and who's not, and I will not tell you."
Is that what John Carpenter told you? Is that what he told you?
Yeah. Me and John, we go way back.
Your buds, your pals.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, like
So he's never revealed it.
he hasn't, but he has said in interviews that there's an answer to the question. Yes, he knows who is and isn't infected, and he won't tell. And
I guess that means the actors probably don't know either.
I guess not, but I've read some interviews with Kurt Russell, and if you're going to talk about like headcanon, apparently like they don't.
Yeah.
It's not in the frame, but MacReady, Kurt Russell in character, as he's having that conversation with Childs, has one hand on his flamethrower the whole time because he makes a comment. He says like if we have any surprises for each other, I doubt either one of us is in a state to do anything about it. But the whole time.
Right.
off camera, out of frame, he's got his hand on the flamethrower, like ready to go. But he doesn't necessarily know, who's infected or not. He's just ready to do something if he has to.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting that we picked the same instance to focus on.
The same giveaway.
Completely opposite. Did you think of this, or did you like piece this together from internet shit?
I mean, I'd thought of it in a way because it does seem like a weird thing to do. I kind of like thought
there's something there.
I thought
there's
of
something
it,
there. Like that's intentional. That whole bit is intentional. It has to be.
It's number
right?
one. It's the climax of the movie. It's like the last scene, and it winds up being a completely counter to all the behavior that you see through the whole thing. And like I had a thought, and I kind of like corroborated it with like poking around on the internet. But yeah, you see him just like knocking back booze the whole movie, and then he's got a bottle. And if that were me, and I had just gone through that experience, that would be the point that I would think like, yeah, I could use a drink. But he doesn't. He doesn't. And instead, he offers it up.
Okay, I'm thinking about this now, and something else tracks about this. If Childs has been out in the cold all this time, he's been outside of the base while it's been blowing up. The alien is resilient, but it doesn't like the cold. Like it froze and went into stasis. So it would make sense that if Childs is an alien, he is slowing down. Like he's actually not able to do alien shit maybe by the time he comes upon MacReady. Because, he looks cold as fuck. Like the man looks like he's been out in the snow for a minute.
Yeah.
So it would make sense that even if he is an alien, that he wouldn't be at full power if he's been out in the cold that long. Because if you notice the thing could just go outside and like circle the base and attack at will if it wanted to.
Yeah,
but
I
it
guess
comes
it could.
inside. It comes inside every chance it gets. Like it runs outside to do its change-o thing and get rid of like shredded clothes and shit, but every opportunity it has, it stays inside and tries to stay warm and alive.
Well, I mean,
so
I don't know. Yeah, there's something there. Yeah, that could be it. But you also like if you go back to earlier in the movie when they figure out what it is they're dealing with, because at the beginning, oh man, you got the thing with the dog, and
the stuff with the dog is
which is
I
really
think that's
cool.
what scared me the most when I was a kid was the dog pen scene.
Right.
It's the first fucked up thing that happens in the movie, but as a kid, that's the dogs usually make it.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
They
those
do
dogs,
not.
No.
They do not in this movie.
They die in spectacular fashion.
It's fucked up, but it made an impression.
But even
I think
before
that's why
that-
people didn't like it.
Even before the dogs get it, the movie opens with that lone dog running across the tundra or whatever, and the Norwegians from the other base are trying to mow this thing down from a helicopter, and they're shouting stuff in Norwegian, and you kind of don't pay attention to it. You're like, oh, it's another language, but they're saying like, don't let it get away, don't let it near you. If you translate what they're saying, don't let it near you. And the first thing, and I didn't notice this when I saw it, the first thing the dog does is jump up and try to lick someone's face.
Oh yeah, the guy with the beard, right?
Yeah, it's Clark, I think his name is in the movie, but you don't think about it because dogs lick people's faces. It's like normal.
But it's
dog
funny
behavior.
because he doesn't get infected.
No,
he's the guy that MacReady
doesn't-
shoots in the head, and then they test him later, and he was okay.
Yeah, he's human. But if you notice, he's got his hands out. It doesn't actually lick his face. It took me a while to figure out that that's not just a dog being a dog and licking someone's face. It's trying to infect this guy. Right off the bat, it's trying to pass itself on, and it's all there on the
dog
screen,
body language.
right in the
In
beginning.
dog body language, that dog doesn't seem scared. Even though it's been chased by a helicopter with a guy shooting a rifle at it, it shows up to this whole herd of new people, and the first thing it does is like jump up and lick somebody. Like it's not behaving like a scared animal.
It doesn't hide under the snow cat or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, the way the camera work is because you see it like slinking around in the base, before they put it in the pen with the other ones. Like, something's supposed to be off, but
The
nothing.
dog's a good actor. That's like the Al
Dude,
Pacino of dogs.
No, they actually in the trivia about this, they mentioned that Carpenter was shocked at how good the trained dog they got, the husky they got for I think it's a husky Malamute blend. That it was able to do all this shit that they never thought it would be able to do, so they had it do more than it was scripted.
Yeah, that dog is
fuck, man,
creepy.
working with animals is hard. And yeah, it came off creepy. Like you'd swear to God that they like. I always just thought it was lighting, but it's a combination of things. The dog's fucking creepy, man.
It sits
and
there
that
like
scene's fucked.
emotionless.
Yeah, it's like the Dennis Reynolds of dogs. It's no, it hits. This movie hits a lot of buttons, like primal fear buttons.
Yeah.
Fear of your friends and loved ones turning against you, fear of isolation, fear of the cold. Like, we don't think about it, but we are kind of hardwired to be afraid of extreme weather to a degree when you don't have shelter, Like, that's a scary, it's like being stranded on the fucking moon. It's scary. And then, of course, fucking monsters with teeth.
Yep.
And it
ticks
really
all the
just...
boxes.
Whew. And, I want to, and also, too, to go along with the stuff Carpenter decided to hide, this isn't so much a remake of the old 50s movie as it is kind of a quasi-sequel, because the events of the 50s movie where they find the flying saucer and they extract it from the ice and they extract the alien body from the ice and bring it back, that's not in this movie except in the videotapes from the Norwegian base that they recover, right?
Right.
So in a few scenes, Carpenter gets through all of that, which is basically exposition. I mean, it's cool stuff, but seeing it as black and white videotape footage is pretty cool too.
Yeah,
And
it's like
ominous,
reminiscent of the original.
Yeah, it's paying tribute to the original, but I think it adds I don't know, another ominous note to it. Just because it's that style of documentary, findings footage. And we know what happens to all the guys in the footage.
Oh, yeah.
And it ain't good. It's not good.
Well, you
and
find them
that's a great scene too.
in when they discover the Norwegians.
Yep.
Oh,
yeah, when they
yeah.
go to the base. That's gruesome. That's
That
gruesome.
melted pile of human stuff just all in one clump. Yeah, it's pretty gruesome.
And then they find the cask, the big ice cube where the thing was frozen, empty. That's awesome. And you see that, that's a big part of the original was it thawing out and waking up.
Yeah.
And the ice block. I don't know. It did a lot in a movie that isn't bloated and isn't long. Like it's not a drag. It's paced wonderfully. And from what I read, Carpenter was really fucking crushed when this didn't do well. But it came out 2 fucking weeks after E.T. Can you believe that? And on the same day as Blade Runner. So people were flocking to theaters to see Spielberg's cute little, what the fuck did he eat in that thing? Reese's Pieces munching little leather alien fucker. And here comes this movie about this shape-shifting fucking tooth monster. Yeah, it was a kick in the balls, I'm sure, because this was an excellent film. It's a cult classic now for a reason. And
Oh yeah.
I don't know, man. I think you might have convinced me. I mean, I'll have to rewatch this again with that in mind.
Here's an asterisk for you.
Oh, there's an asterisk?
Yeah, get ready. Okay.
Oh, shit.
But in order to get into this, we got to talk about the other thing, the bad one.
There's another thing?
From 2011.
You're talking about the prequel.
Yeah.
Right?
It's bad.
Right.
And I hate to call back to this movie. And here's why. I say an asterisk because I don't want this tidbit to ruin my theory here, but it bears mentioning. And I don't want to credit anything to this trash movie, which was billed as like we did all the same practical effects as the original, and then like some producers got involved and we got something that looked like, just a crappy video game version of The Thing. Oh, it was so bad. But
Now,
there's
the movie, that movie. Okay, so people could get confused if they've never seen either movie and they go looking for The Thing. You want the one that says 1982 and has the big shining dude outline as the art. You don't want the movie from 2011, which is also just for some ungodly reason just called The Thing, which is not a remake of the Carpenter movie. It's a prequel. And it has a lot of problems, but the CGI literally ruins it. It ruins the movie.
One of the best parts about the John Carpenter one was the practical effects. And they said they were going to do a return to that, and you got the exact opposite, because the effects in the first one were gnarly. They were so good, and then you got some just bad computer stuff in 2011.
Do you know why? Do you know why they went in a different direction? That was Bob Boughton, by the way, that did the special effects for John Carpenter's movie.
Yeah, amazing. No, I don't know why.
No, I'm asking. I don't know either.
I had heard that so the producers got involved, and they just they said that we don't like it, and probably for the same reasons that people didn't initially like The Thing during its original theatrical run.
It's upsetting.
Yeah,
practical effects are upsetting. They're
said
visceral,
we don't like it,
and they're disturbing.
I heard somebody describe that kind of stuff. Like, you look at some practical effects, it's like they look fake, but they feel real. And you look at CGI, and it's the opposite. They look real, but they feel fake. It's a feel thing.
Oh, that's good.
And
I like that.
It feels
it's something
fake.
about textures. It's something about the way soft things move.
And you can tell when they're in the room with something interacting. You can tell when it's there in their space, and when it's not. When it was clearly just kind of dropped into frame on a computer, and it just gives a totally different feel. It does, in my opinion, it doesn't work.
All right, so the 2011 movie is chock full of that shit.
Yeah,
but
awful.
what it attempts to do is tell the story of the Norwegian scientists in the video camera footage that we see in Carpenter's movie. The base that MacReady investigates with all the dead bodies and everything, it basically, for no reason at all, tells us the story of how that happened and how that chopper and dog came to be running toward the American base. That's how it actually ends in a post-credit scene. I'm telling you, and if you haven't seen it, I mean, good for you. But
don't.
Yeah, that's
don't see it.
It ends with a recreation of that, and it tries to fake you out because you're waiting for the whole movie to see who survives, and you're like, it has to be this one because who else is going to end up going, and where the hell does the helicopter come from, and it fakes you out because it's almost two new people on the scene. It's terrible. It's terrible. But so why do we have to acknowledge that this movie exists and make it canon?
Because they make a reference to part of the genius of the first one was, how do you know who is infected and who isn't? And they kind of come up with a way to tell in the prequel, and it has to do with the Thing being unable to copy inorganic material. Like fillings in your teeth or jewelry. Right. And one notable piece of jewelry in the final scene of the good one, the John Carpenter one, is Childs' earring. So if you take that prequel as canon, then it casts doubt on the idea that Childs is infected because he's got the same earring. Now, you could say that it couldn't copy the earring, but if it can make a perfect copy and try to, it also puts clothes on.
That's true.
That's part of how they figure out, that
it's
copying people. It shreds through your clothes, so it has to.
And it has the sentience to rip out name tags too of the clothing that it leaves behind. It can think. It's not just like an animal. it can absolutely think. So
Yeah.
it's not beyond the pale that it put his earring in its ear.
Right.
But you
Or
can't exactly
takes him over.
like wear fillings, right?
Yeah, or it takes him over and it like assimilates itself around the earring. It doesn't copy the earring. The earring just stays put. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, there's also a scene in the well, I guess you could argue about that, but in the prequel there's a scene where they're dissecting one of the creatures that got killed like in mid coitus. And they find the copy growing inside of it, but they also find I think it's a metal plate that was in the dead guy's arm from when he broke it. Like they just kind of find it floating around in the monster.
Right.
So it wasn't incorporated into the copy. So it didn't do it there. I don't know. Doesn't the doctor have a nose ring
He
in
does.
the Carpenter movie? It's weird.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing.
It is a weird
It's
thing.
a weird thing.
I mean, it's also a weird thing to pick up and move to Antarctica, you know?
Yeah, the people down there don't seem like they're like you hear about people who move to Alaska, and a lot of them have at least just one thing in common is that they just didn't want to be part of
Society.
the rhythm of life down here anymore, which I can totally relate to most of the time. It's got to be on a different level for people who choose to go live in Antarctica and basically live in a moon base for a winter. That's a hell of a thing to volunteer for.
It's about as remote as you can get.
Yeah, and I mean, you're not alone, but you're cut off from help.
No, you're alone.
If something happens to you,
you're
you're screwed. Yeah, like nothing. There's times when the weather is so bad, literally nothing can fly to those people. Nothing can. There's no vehicle that can get to them. So they might as well be on the moon.
That's a theme in the movie. Like they have a weather guy. He's one of the dudes that gets Bennings, I think his name is. And that to me, that's one of the creepier scenes too. He's their weather guy, and every time MacReady's talking about taking the helicopter up, he's they look at him and he's like, oh, the winds are this many miles per hour out of the northeast, and he gives them the conditions, and ultimately it's Mac's decision if he's going to take the chopper up, but he needs that info because that could keep you grounded. He gets infected in a great scene. They're taking the remains that they found into like this storeroom, and the camera starts to show like this thing's not dead yet. It was just frozen because it starts to move, and then there's I love the scene because there's another character called Windows. They call him Windows because he wears these like weird glasses. He's like their communications guy on the radio, but he comes back in. He's like, "Come on, Bennings, we gotta get a move on." And he sees him being assimilated. The thing's got him all wrapped up around his neck with like this tentacle thing, and it's like taking him over, and he freaks and he runs. But there's an audio thing that it's like you most people miss it, but you hear the keys that he's holding hit the floor. He's got the keys to the closet in his hand, and he drops them and runs.
Oh, okay.
And which becomes important later because they're trying to figure out how anyone could get the keys to the blood locker before they do the blood test. But that answers that question. Windows had him, and he dropped them and ran, But then Bennings runs out into the snow. The thing isn't done assimilating him yet. And for the first time, they see what it's trying to do. They see that it's trying to make a perfect copy, and they catch it halfway through. And it's very reminiscent of that scene in The Body Snatchers you brought up earlier when Donald Sutherland like points and screams. They look at it and they say his name like Bennings, and it just opens its mouth.
Yeah.
And this fucking noise comes out. This just like makes your blood run cold.
And then you see it's like deformed ass hands.
Yeah.
And shit. It's gross.
And then they're like,
gross.
Fuck this. They roast it. Yeah, it was creepy as hell, and it wound up being like one of the scarier scenes. That's why I peg it as a horror movie, because at that moment they all realize what they're up against, and also like you're just looking at the screen. That thing is creepy, with its like weird hand, and it knows that they've got it dead to rights, and it just lets out its death knell. Oh, it's so good.
And it ends on a downer. Any good horror movie ends on a downer. Shit.
Yeah. Yeah, they
You want
all
to hear
do.
something? You want to hear something funny about that Windows character that I found out while reading about this movie?
Sure.
Apparently, that dude's name was Sanders in the script, but the actor, who's a cat named Thomas Waits, not that guy,
Not Tom Waits. Thomas Waits.
not Tom Waits, Thomas G. Waits.
I did know that guy's name.
Yeah, he just started showing up to rehearsals wearing sunglasses, and he told John Carpenter, "I want everyone to call me Windows from now on."
Huh.
And no one ever found out why. And Carpenter apparently just said, "Yeah, okay," and changed his name to Windows because I guess he thought it added character and was
I like
quirky. I never really thought about it. Windows has been such an ubiquitous name for most of my life that it just kind of felt natural.
Right. Yeah.
And he was a weird dude, so it would stand that you would have a nickname.
Of course he did.
It works. Man, I don't know. This is I like a lot of Carpenter's early stuff, and this seemed like it was. I mean, he had a huge budget for this movie compared to other movies he made,
Yeah.
and it was special. And it's a shame that it didn't do good when it came out for him and for everyone who was in it. But it's great that we still have it.
Mm-hmm.
And it sucks that the prequel was terrible. They should never have touched it.
Well, speaking of prequels and sequels, like here's a neat little Easter egg for you. I think Carpenter's most well-known movie is obviously the first Halloween, right? And if you remember, what's her name, Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis is babysitting the kid. I forget the kid's name, but
Tommy.
Okay, yeah, Tommy's watching TV. Do you remember what he's watching on TV when she's babysitting him?
It's the original thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the original thing.
Yeah, from the 51. Yeah, yep.
So that shows up in Halloween. So we know John Carpenter's a fan, right? And he directs Halloween. It's like one of the biggest movies of all time. It kicks off this whole slasher genre. And I mean, maybe it wasn't the first, but it definitely brought it to the, into the mainstream. And that had a bunch of sequels. And I don't know if you had the misfortune or to watch the last one, Halloween Ends.
Yeah.
Did you
I've
see that?
seen it.
Yeah.
I saw them all, man. I've seen them all.
That awful Michael Myers replacement dude, that's babysitting in the beginning. Do you remember what the kid was watching on the TV when he was like he's watching a scary movie?
Was it the 82 movie?
He's watching the 82 thing from John Carpenter, and we come full circle.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah,
that's
man.
really fucking funny.
I noticed that
That's
immediately.
A neat little. That's a shame it was in that movie, but that's cool.
That movie's
that's
garbage.
cool. Well, were you a X-Files fan?
Oh
when
yeah,
you were
I loved
a kid?
it. I loved it.
Do you remember the episode called Ice from the first season?
Which one was Ice? I mean, I
It was
probably
basically. I mean, it was basically a tribute to the Carpenter movie. The setup is Mulder and Scully go to investigate a research base in Alaska because they haven't heard from these geologists. They haven't checked in and they can't contact them.
Yes,
So
I do remember
Mulder and
this.
Scully go up with 3 science bitches and a pilot to go investigate. And it turns out that they drilled down into the ice and deeper than they had ever gone before, and they extract this parasite that's like an earwig worm that crawls in your ear and then takes up residence in the back of your neck on your brainstem and shit, and makes you really violent and unpredictable, and then kills you.
I do remember that. And they
It's
think
the whole-
Mulder's
yeah.
infected. Yeah.
And they lock him in a room. Like, it's the whole basic, the same setup of nobody knows who else is infected, and the first person to go, and also it starts in a dog, just like
it
Carpenter's
does.
movie.
It does.
Yep, it starts in a dog, and the first person to get taken out is the pilot. that
Like-
got them there.
Yeah,
So
like
and then a
MacReady.
storm comes in. Yeah, and then a storm comes in. So they're stuck. And it's this whole cat and mouse game of who is and who isn't infected. But they fortunately figure out at least a one-time cure by the end of the episode.
Yeah, they give them some kind of injection or something.
No, they figure it's like a
alcohol or something.
No, it's like a Japanese fighting fish thing. Scully notices that when two of the worms are in jars next to each other, they're trying to fight through the glass.
yeah.
And it's terrible old CGI. It's
give
the
'em
only part
another
of the
one.
episode that sucks. Right. If you put two of them in one person, they kill each other. It like cancels out, and then they just kind of like fall out. You just kind of poop it out.
Gross.
Yeah, and it turns out it's the other woman. I forget her name. She's a blonde scientist lady. She's the one that's infected, and Mulder was okay the whole time. Because that's the whole thing. They only have one left by the end of the episode.
And if they give it
So
to
if
them and they're wrong, they'll infect them.
they infected him, right? But if the person is infected, they save them. So that was the whole. It's a great setup for an hour of TV.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, like they didn't even have as much time as Carpenter had, and it was a nice tribute to the movie that the prequel absolutely wasn't. And I don't know, it's fun to watch even now. It's a tense one. It's one of the scarier ones from the early seasons. So if you've never seen it, season 1, episode 8, Ice
Episode
of the
8.
X-Files.
Season 1 was
Check it
awesome.
out. Yeah, dude. And I also found something interesting about MacReady
Okay.
that I did not know that ties into you and ties into you saying how important his drinking is.
Yeah.
Apparently there was this whole backstory for the character, and I also have to go do some sleuthing on the internet because supposedly there was a completely different cut of this film broadcast on TV where there's all these extra scenes that introduce each character and give them like a little backstory, and apparently Carpenter hated it, and he was really mad that it happened. But apparently it was included on some Blu-ray release of the thing. I'm not sure which one, but there was a Blu-ray release of it that included that as like a special feature.
I have it on Blu-ray. I have to see if it's on there.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends on which issuing of the Blu-ray is, if it's on the special features. But if it was on a disc, the chances are it's floating around out there on the internet. So we gotta look for that. But in addition to that, as happens on a lot of sets, the characters had backstories that they knew and that were scripted, and possibly from that story things might have been filmed, but don't end up actually in the final film. And apparently when Carpenter and Russell were coming up with MacReady's backstory, their headcanon for him was that he was a Vietnam helicopter pilot who went through some hardcore shit and basically went down there up there to hide, as so many people do. He has severe PTSD and insomnia and is an alcoholic because of it.
Okay.
And, you know, if you watch the movie with that in mind, I mean, he does stay awake the whole time.
Yeah.
It does seem like he never sleeps. Like, we come upon him drinking scotch and playing chess with a computer in his little hut there. So all that works. And that's kind of something just neat to have in the back of your head.
Yeah, like
You know,
when
and
he's
also-
making the recording on the tape recorder, and he just keeps saying like, "We're all very tired," you know. But like,
Yeah.
you're also tired, like, but he's also not sleeping.
That's a great scene too, by the way. That's just a fantastic scene. I like how he admits some shit. Like, doesn't he say like how nobody trusts each other anymore?
Yeah, none of us
And then
know who
he
to
rewinds
trust.
it. Yeah, he rewinds it and records over it.
Yeah.
like, to hide that fact. If you don't know how an old cassette tape recorder works, you might not catch that, but that's what he's doing.
Oh
and-
yeah, I take that for granted. Like I know how a tape recorder
Right?
works, but you had to.
Yeah, I
record
mean,
over it.
I noticed it on this last watch through. I'm like, wow, look how fucking big those buttons are, and how loud. Like, it's like such a tactile button, you know. And then I'm like, wow, kids have probably never had to push two buttons at once to make a tape record.
That's true.
Fuck, that sucks. Also, something about MacReady being a Vietnam vet that plays. he doesn't really ever seem fazed by any of the gore.
No.
And he reacts really quickly when shit like that happens, and that ties into being a combat vet too. You know, it all tracks. It all tracks. It's something neat to have.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And doesn't he
man.
tell Childs at one point that he's a light sleeper?
Yeah. He says
Yeah.
when he comes back in and they're just convinced because they find his jacket all shredded up.
Right. That's
But
when Childs starts getting all weird about him.
I think the thing is trying to frame him. I think it's like identified him as the prime threat, and
Sure.
it like you find a jacket that says MacReady on it, and it's all shredded to suggest that he's a copy, and then
So
he comes
you love
back
Kurt
in with
Russell
the
in
dynamite.
this, right?
Oh yeah, Kurt Russell's great.
Well, you want to hear the list of actors that turned this role down?
Oh yes, tell me.
So the top choice was Nick Nolte. And
God.
he apparently immediately rejected the offer. He was followed by Jeff Bridges, Tom Berenger, Christopher Walken, Scott Glenn, Roy Scheider, Chris Christopherson, Sam Shepard, Jack Thompson, Tom Atkins, and finally Don Johnson.
Holy shit.
Before Carpenter went to his old buddy and just made it Kurt Russell.
Dude, Kurt Russell.
And apparently it took him a year. It took him a year to grow that lustrous mane and beard that we see in there.
I can't imagine anyone else in that role. He's so good in that role. He's just like unflappable. But I will say, I would be very curious to see a Christopher Walken version of The Thing. Could you imagine Christopher Walken?
No, especially
doing all
that
those
era.
lines. Oh
Especially
my
that
God.
era of Walken, because that's like around when he made King of New York, and he was like, started dancing in most of his movies for no reason, and started getting really super weird with it. So yeah, that could have been fun.
I'd watch that movie.
I'd watch that movie. I'd fucking watch that movie. So they filmed a lot of this, the outdoor stuff in British Columbia, but apparently most of the interior set stuff they filmed in Los Angeles on a refrigerated set when it was 100 degrees outside.
Of course.
Acting.
They're all running around.
Gotta act hot when
parkas.
it's cold. Gotta act hot when it's cold. Out on the beach, freezing your nuts off, saying everybody's surfing. All
Can you
right.
imagine you're doing like later that day, you get off of work on set at The Thing, and you walk outside. You're like, Jesus Christ. That happens to me sometimes. I work in a meat locker, and in July, it's the same sort of like transition. It's like I've been in 33 degrees all day, and then I walk outside, it's 97.
I used to work I worked in a couple kitchens in my life, but I used to work in a really, really small, really hot kitchen. And in the winter, it was the same feeling. Like you're in this sweat box. It's like 97 degrees at least all day over a grill and 2 fryers. And then you walk outside and it's like you just walked into the walk-in, and it's snowing,
Yeah.
and you're like, whoa, and you're in shorts and a very wet t-shirt. Yeah, dude, this movie is fun. It's got a great cast of character actors. Again, I mean, we've talked about The Crow, and and how important it is for an ensemble cast to be just packed with really not stars, because that's a whole different Ocean's 11 kind of problem, but a truly like ensemble cast. It needs those great character actors who can just make every scene work, and that's what you get with this movie. And yeah, I mean, I like your ending. I like this thing. So to sum everything up, what we're positing now here is that the meaning behind the ending of The Thing is that in the final scene, MacReady is holding a bottle of fuel meant for Molotov cocktails, not scotch, and he hands it to Childs to drink, and Childs takes a sip, and the fact that he's an alien means that he doesn't know he just drank a whole mouthful of fuel oil.
Like kerosene.
And yeah, he takes a good pull of it, and like it's whiskey, and MacReady gives a little smile to himself,
he
and
laughs.
that's how the movie ends. So what do we think happens after that scene? Does MacReady just waste him right
He
there?
roasts him.
Yeah, because
He roasts him.
you said we can't see it on screen, but he still has his flamethrower, and he's got it pointed at him, right?
Yeah, and Childs is clearly just sat there taking a pull from a bottle. He's defenseless, you know.
And we've come up with a hypothesis as to why he might be sluggish and unable to be at his full tentacle-y, alien-y power.
Or
because he was fucking cold.
And he knows MacReady's armed, and he knows like it's not. He thinks he has him fooled. As long as the thing thinks it's got you fooled, it doesn't reveal its hand unless it has to, you know.
Yeah, and I think, I think throughout this movie, its goal was never to pretend to be a person and get rescued. Its goal was to just survive enough to infect whoever comes looking.
Right.
And then get taken back. You know what I mean? Like, so, because we don't even know how long it can hold a form.
Well,
it might have a time limit, you know?
There's a line earlier when they find the wreckage, and the one guy, the guy who has the heart attack, I forget his name, whose chest opens up and bites off the doctor's arms. Oh God.
Yeah.
That guy.
Yeah, the guy with the curly hair. He's the one with the head that comes off and turns into the goddamn spider.
Yep, that's the one.
The thing that scared the shit out of everybody, yeah.
He looks at the wreckage and the ice, and he says, "How long do you think that this thing's been here?" And he looks and he goes, "Based on the ice, I'd say at least 100,000 years." So that scene where it crash lands at the very beginning, like before the credits even, that was 100,000 years before the events of the movie. So even if it freezes to death, like it knows that it'll survive because it has so far.
That tickles the grundle a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That scale.
Yeah.
Just adding that time scale to it.
That's a long
It'll
time.
freak you out. It'll freak you. Anything that big. Anything that's just scary as hell. Anything that can survive that is just inherently scary.
Yep.
Just another thing. Just another little tiny tidbit that it was just an instinct from Carpenter. Because in the original, the thing just crash landed.
Right.
Because
it
it's the
happened
50s
right
and
before.
flying saucers were everywhere. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I think, man, what a great idea. What a great idea to have it like come up from ancient ice. So much scarier that it's been here the whole entirety of human civilization, just
Terrifying.
waiting. Fucking terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Great stuff. All right. Cool. Anything else to say about one of your favorite movies?
Oh man, I just that I think that in addition to just being scary in the moment with all the gnarly stuff happening on screen, like the guy whose head turns into a spider and even its blood is alive and can try to kill you. I think the fact that one of the even scarier than that is that you don't know who you can trust, and just in a place where you're already isolated, feeling completely alone, even in a room full of people, because any one of them could at any moment have its head open up with a bunch of teeth in it and try to bite your fucking head off. Scary as hell. Horror masterpiece, firmly rooted in sci-fi, but definitely a horror movie and definitely my favorite.
The message is the entire world is an Antarctic base.
Yeah.
And anyone could turn on you at any time.
Yeah. You are alone. You are utterly alone.
We are all alone. We all die alone and wondering if teeth will sprout from our chest. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, man.
Hey, man, it's my pleasure.